Are there issues and problems in your life that you want to break away from and feel like you can't? Do you wonder, how can I be free from these issues that have destroyed my life? Well, my friend, I have the answer. Bible Way Hibner Memorial Church of God in Christ presents Chain Breakers, this and every Sunday at 9 a.m. here on WHYL.
From the L.B. Smith Ford Lincoln Studios, Oldies 102.9 is WHYL Carlisle.
It's time now for the Real Estate Radio Guy with real estate broker John Rainville. For the next hour, you'll learn everything about national real estate topics, trends, and news revolving around Central PA. It's sponsored by GSF Mortgage Corporation, EnviroQuest Inspections, and SearchHomesInPA.com. And now, here's the Real Estate Radio Guy, John Rainville.
Good morning. Hey, it's a really nice sunshiny day, and I don't know what Big Dog must have twitchy fingers over there today. I don't know.
A little bit, I think.
Next week he's got to put on his big boy pants because Eric's not going to be here.
Uh-oh.
All right, smoke test next week, folks. Hey, we've got a really good show today. I'm feeling a whole lot better this weekend than we did last weekend. Last weekend, we've got one of those Keurig machines. Yeah, and my wife Betty doesn't like me to make a whole pot of coffee because then it's old by the time she gets up. So what's that cost? 25, 50 cents. One of those Keurigs is 50 cents for the cup.
Oh, for the cup.
Yeah, so she's got all these flavored ones. So if you noticed last week I was dragging because I had something like a caramel macchiato, and I was dying by the time I got home. I had to take a nap and not drink a pot of coffee. I looked on the thing, all it is sugar and flavorings.
Well, yeah.
Yeah, it tastes great, but no jolt.
Yeah, I had something like that similar, and I looked at it. It was a cappuccino something or other. And it came out, it was all nice. It looked great.
It tasted wonderful.
Frothy and everything else. I'm like, what? So we had a whole box of those sitting there for the last 9 months.
Yeah.
So they're for the guests that you don't necessarily really want over.
That's right. Yep. Well, hey, we had a good show last week. We had Ryan Tamarchio on from Assist to Sell explaining how their system works. Today we're really have a show for consumers and for realtors. We're going to be talking about agency and WTF. Who's my agent? Are you really my agent? And what are their responsibilities? And what are they doing? Because there's a lot of confusion about it out in the market. Even realtors that have been in the business for a while are confused as to who can talk to who about what, and what their role is. Is it to be a gunslinger or not a gunslinger? That might be another topic for a show. But we're going to start off, I want to talk about agency, and we're really, going to be doing a lot of the things here off of the consumer notice so that everyone gets an idea of what the different types of agency are and, what the consumer needs to do.
Now, is it a contract or is it not a contract? Because you're signing it, so if it's not a contract, why am I being forced to sign it?
Right. There is a consumer notice that's pretty much across the board in all 50 states now. And it's called different things, but it's really to explain to the consumer who the agent represents. And a lot of them don't realize, for example, here in Pennsylvania, if they do not have a signed buyer's agency, technically that agent's working for the seller, and we're going to get into that. But things we're going to be going over are, what type of agency is there? Well, there's seller agency. When someone's representing the seller, there's buyer agency, there's dual agency, and there's designated agency. And then we're also going to be talking about transactional licensees and how that comes into play. So if you have any questions today, feel free to call into us at 717-249-1787 or put it on Facebook. We're out there at Facebook on Real Estate Radio Guys, broadcasting live right now. So hopefully we've got enough volume out there now. And let's get started. First we're going to talk about the seller's agent. So really that's when someone represents the seller, and typically we call that in the business listing a home. And their fiduciary responsibility is really to the seller, to help them get the best price, best terms, and condition on any contract they would help them negotiate. This also applies on rental units. So there's actually rental units, and that agent, if they're listing the rental units for the landlord, a consumer should also sign a consumer notice and be advised that that agent is representing the landlord and not specifically them. Were you aware of that?
I was not, and I don't actually. I mean, I would imagine people that list rentals really kind of specialize in that. I mean, it's not very often that you would.
Well, we had Jesse on. He does property management. He does both. Do you know what I mean? But a lot of realtors don't realize that when they're doing those rental units, they need to advise the consumer of their rights here with a consumer notice. But back on the seller's agency, that agent, that licensee, their job is to really make a continuous and a good faith effort to find a buyer or tenant, except when it's already under an existing agreement. Now, we do see in our market lately, a lot of agents are lagging on putting a property in the multi-list as under contract, sometimes until after all the contingencies except the financing have been lifted. Have you been seeing that on the financing end?
No, I've just gotten a lot of pressure for making sure that we do have that contingency lifted as far as the financing contingency, because I think especially in this market, the selling agent, if you will, wants to know that it's a deal quicker than normal. So I think they've been kind of pushing that mortgage contingency, further up the contract because they don't want to miss out on the listing period.
Right, and because if you
market.
don't meet that, that's one of those critical dates, and if you don't meet it, they can cancel the contract on you. The seller has that right.
Which in and of itself is a topic, because in this competitive market, if you're a listing agent and, as you said, you leave it as still available until certain contingencies are lifted, I would imagine that there are still agents that are still showing the property,
and they may possibly be taking backup offers,
and or getting interest in the property and backup offers, and saying, "Hey, look, it's technically under contract at XYZ," and
right.
They may be coming in and saying, "Hey, look, I'll give you an extra $20,000 or whatever the case may be if another buyer really loves it."
Right.
Then all of a sudden, as a selling agent, I would imagine that your interest is to make sure that first of all, the contract
well,
goes
your
through.
fiduciary responsibility, you've got that offer comes in, even if you have a contract, you must present it to the seller, and then that's up to them if they want to get into a battle over which contract they go forward.
Well, if it's already under contract, however, it's going to push, I would imagine, the selling agent to put a little bit of pressure on the buying agent and the buyers to stick with that contract and those contingencies as far as inspections and mortgage contingency, etc.
Right.
So if you've got somebody at $40,000 higher in the wings, you'd be like, "Oh, sorry, July 1st is passing."
Right.
You have that option.
You do have that option. Everything really is confidential if you're the listing agent. It should only be between you and the seller, okay? And here's another thing, folks, with agency. A lot of people don't realize is whenever you list a property, you're actually listing with the broker, not with Tom Realtor that's sitting in front of you. You're actually listing with the broker for the company, and that's actually their listing. So then we're going to get into that a little bit further down the line. We start talking about dual agency and designated agency. So just always remember the company or the broker, they're actually your listing broker, okay? And the agent actually works for them and then has fiduciary responsibilities to keep your information confidential and, treat you fairly. Sort of makes sense, right?
Yeah, it makes sense.
Makes sense.
Makes sense.
Makes sense.
I mean, it's like going to a doctor and you never really see the doctor, and you have the aide come
physician's
in,
assistant.
and they'll walk in for maybe 20 seconds, if at all, and be like, yeah, you look good, okay, it was good seeing you again,
Right.
and their name goes on everything, but
All right, so then the other type of agent is a buyer's agent, and they are on the other side of the table. But folks, again, when you sign a buyer agency contract with a realtor or a real estate agent, you're actually engaging the services of the broker, okay? And the agent's still an agent.
so that's a different contract.
Different contract.
Well, actually, technically, consumer notice is not a contract.
Right.
But it's something completely separate that you're signing.
Right, that's correct. And we're going to go into that buyer's contract here later on here in the show. But the agent's fiduciary responsibility is to the buyer, and so they're supposed to help you get the best price, terms, conditions that they can help you negotiate. But again, folks, remember, John's rule is the real estate agent's really a Sherpa. Okay, so they're not supposed to be a gunslinger out there to beat the seller up for $50 for you. Their job is really to try and guide you to the top of the mountain, which is getting your home, without falling off the cliff or freezing in the middle of the night. And that's what they're really good at, because they're good at solving problems. I think most top realtors are superior, out-of-the-box thinkers, and have had the experience to be able to solve a problem when it comes up in the purchase process. Would you agree?
Yeah,
I mean, not everyone, but most. I mean, most of the good ones.
Most of the good ones. I mean, they're there and they kind of just diffuse, I think, a lot of situations, more so than anything else. But, I mean, they're negotiators. That's what they do. So the idea is to get it to the table, get your house, and in between, unfortunately, there's a lot of landmines that you can or have to sidestep.
Right, but with the inspections and everything like that, with financing contingencies.
And then having to maybe renegotiate when something pops up that
absolutely
people weren't aware of before. So, yeah.
Absolutely. The next type of agency is dual agency. And some companies or brokers do not permit that in-house. They do not want the liability. And that's where you're representing both parties, which is totally legal here in Pennsylvania as long as both parties agree. And that's really if two agents from the same company, not necessarily the same agent, represent different parties. So if we have XYZ Realty and I'm the broker and I have two different agents, one has listing and one brings the buyer, we're in a dual agency situation.
And a lot of brokerages don't allow that?
Well, a lot of them feel that there's some liability there because there could be some crossing of information, that may be construed as confidential on one party's or the other's behalf. And that's where they sort of get concerned, that there may be some commingling of information. For example, I'm not saying this happens, but maybe Agent A, has overheard the listing agent say in the office, boy, they're a really motivated seller, man. I really need to get an offer on that. And they process that in their head that means that they can go in and beat the seller up, for a much lower price.
So it's borderline kind of like insider trading.
Yeah. I would say that's probably a valid analogy.
All right. So then what happens in the event if we've got such a liability issue here with dual agency? What happens when the same agent that is initially the listing agent, the selling agent,
same thing,
has an actual buyer come to them?
Here in Pennsylvania, they have both parties, the buyer and the seller would have to both agree that that's the same situation, that they're fine with that agent representing.
And that's legal.
That's legal as long as both parties agree to it in writing.
So now here's the gray area then.
Okay.
You go back to this situation where I'm in the same office as you, and I'm over at the water cooler and over here you talking about how desperate this seller is to sell. Well, how do I separate the information in my head when it comes in from the seller and information from the buyer. I mean, how do you legally, I don't want to say legally, but I guess that's more of a moral issue?
Well, absolutely. Well, it's actually a fiduciary responsibility issue, too. I mean, because you're supposed to treat both parties fairly. So then at that point, you might want to step out.
Well, see, that's kind of like a Midas deal now.
Well, because you want to make a Midas deal. Well, because you want to step away to reduce the liability. So maybe you would go to the broker, and the broker would say, "Okay, we do have another option. Okay, we can use designated agency." So designated agency is if you're that agent and you come to me and say, "Geez, I got these people. They want to buy both. They want to buy. It's my listing. They came through the open house." Fine. I'm the broker. I can say, "Well, listen, why don't we see if they would both be willing to do designated agency? I'll get another agent that knows nothing about, let's say, the buyer, and let them work and represent the buyer. You continue to work with the seller." And then that's designated agency. But now, if you've already gotten financial information or something on that buyer, you may have some, definite moral and fiduciary issues.
Well, see, now you bring up an interesting topic, because in that instance, I would say even before you talk to the buyer or get any information, you would step off and say, "Hey, I'm just a listing agent. I don't work with buyers. However, let me get somebody that can work with you," right?
Correct.
But now it seems like you've got a complete opposite magnetization of what every realtor on the planet shoots for, and that's to get both sides of a listing agreement.
You mean both? Yeah, you want to list it and sell it,
right?
Correct.
So you've got. I mean, this isn't something that happens very seldomly. This is what everybody shoots for.
Right.
So we're all gunning to have both sides of a transaction, and you're gunning and being thrust into this situation where you have to be fiduciary responsible.
Right, because in both situations, the broker, whoever's sitting in that broker chair, no matter what, whether we're designated agency or we're dual agency, disclosed dual agency, broker's in the hot seat. Broker is a dual agent in both situations.
And the dual agency is obviously disclosed at the time a buyer comes in and wants to write an offer through the same agent or agent in the office.
Correct. And that all has to be explained up front in writing, and everyone has to understand that.
And I would imagine the realtor that's working with the buyer at that point would have to notify you with interest on writing on a home that is listed through that brokerage office.
Correct.
Or company.
Correct. I mean, now some agencies I can tell you, I do know of one that they will do no dual agency. So they will not let any of their agents sell their own listings. Wow.
Interesting topic.
Yeah.
Because now let's just bring in a little topic as far as for sale by owner.
Well, we're going to come to that. That's next.
Right. And what about all of those flat fee places?
Okay. Well, let's go into that's great. Well, let's move right into transactional licensee, which covers.
Well, you don't like that topic? A little more controversial?
No. It covers a for sale by owner. And I think, so with a transactional licensee, an agent doesn't have to represent either party. And out in Colorado, that's the way they operate. Every agent in Colorado is a broker, believe it or not. They're considered a broker. But then there's the next designation, which is supervising broker. That's another show topic. But they do transactional licensee. So they basically fill in the paperwork and say, we don't.
And which state is that in?
Colorado.
Colorado is also one of the first states for marijuana licensing. Parallel?
Possibly. Possibly. So transaction licensee, folks, that's another option you have out there. So, for example, a for sale by owner may have a realtor come and, they always say, hey, if I bring you a buyer, will you pay me a commission? And here in Pennsylvania, we actually have a form so that can be done. That's called a broker's fee agreement, and that sort of specifies what the responsibilities are. And let me sort of just tell you this, that it's going to really exonerate the agent from just about everything the way it's
So
written.
we're on a for sale by owner issue.
We're using it as a for sale by owner.
Right, and I go up to the for sale by owner as a realtor, and I say, hey, look, I'd love to list your house, right?
Right.
And they say, look, you're awesome, you're fabulous, but, I'm an expert at this. I've got this. Okay, but I'll tell you what. If you find a buyer for me, I'll actually pay you your side or a determined amount of commission that you would normally buy or get as a buyer's agent.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. So there's a document, folks. If you want a copy of it, it's called the broker's fee agreement. And obviously the seller has to represent that they're not represented by a broker, and you actually have to tell the for sale by owner exactly who the buyer is. You have to name them
Before they sign this, or as they sign it.
No. Well, at the time of signing is when I'm going to do it, but that actually gets filled in. But all of the responsibilities as far as property condition, things like that, is all back onto the seller. So, for example, I'm going to say one of my agents, I went with them this week, and they did one over in Elizabethtown. And
For sale by owner, like this, buyer's agreement.
Seller had found the buyer and wanted us to come in and act as a transactional licensee and do the paperwork. And how we handled that situation is we had both parties in the same room. And, of course, we went through the consumer notice for both of them. We went through, who's representing and non-representation for the buyer, the broker's fee agreement with the seller. And then we started to fill the agreement out. And we went through, and each heading that we came to, we would ask both parties what they wanted. And whatever they agreed to there is what we filled in.
Okay.
And, just wanted to, and we explained both parties what their options were at every fill in the blank so that everybody knew and so that everyone was comfortable. Because no matter what, I personally believe you still have a fiduciary responsibility to make sure that both parties are informed of what their options are.
So this is more or less arbitration.
It's sort of like instantaneous negotiation is what we found it to be.
All right.
So that, negotiating things over possession, what was staying with the property, what wasn't staying with the property, how long the seller could stay there after settlement. These are all some of the things that came up, in our conversation while we were filling it out. So in that situation, that is another way to do business.
Now let's go back to this broker's fee agreement.
Okay.
So you can see that. All right. So I want to go back to the situation so we know who's liable and who's not in this particular scenario, because obviously there's a lot of different ways you can skin a cat. And no, we're not talking about Chinese food here or anything. So I come up to a for sale by owner and I say, hey, look, I've got Joe Smith over here interested in your home. Well, I'd be happy to pay you a percentage or whatever as a buyer's fee. And you have them sign this buyer fee agreement, right? And they're going to agree to pay you whatever it may be. Maybe it's 2% or maybe it's the full 3%.
Right.
At this particular point, there's nobody representing the seller. Is the seller still bound by all of the rules, regulations, to-dos,
Good point.
as if they are being represented? I mean, they're responsible to know that a seller's...
Okay. It says right in the agreement that the seller will reveal defects and environmental hazards. So we actually at the table had the seller fill out a seller's property disclosure. We still gave both parties cost estimates, which
Lead
isn't
paint,
necessarily
all that good
required,
stuff.
but we wanted to make sure We wanted to make sure that both parties were fully informed, even though we were only being paid as a transactional licensee.
And if we're being paid as... Now, in this particular case, are we still considered a transactional licensee if we're just bringing the buyer?
Because you may have a buyer's agency? Well, That's a good question.
Does one trump the other?
Well, okay, so with the broker's fee agreement, you do not have to just be a transactional licensee. You could come with a buyer's agency.
In which case you would just fill out like your standard 3%.
Correct.
With them as long as the seller agreed to pay that at closing.
Correct.
Okay.
But, your obligation, for as far as pricing in that on the seller, since you didn't have it listed, some of those things would be a moot point. Okay.
So let's just look at that scenario. Then I've got a buyer.
Okay.
Joe Blow over here. And I have a buyer's agency listed with him. And obviously he agrees that I'm paid as a buyer's agent, which is normally 3%. Now, in that buyer's agreement, does a realtor normally say, hey, look, Joe, in the event that the seller doesn't pay me 3%, you're going to make that up for me because that's normally what I get paid as a buyer's agent?
Well, they could. I mean, it's going to go by the buyer's agency agreement. That's, everyone knows here in PA and every other state that uses buyer's agency, that's another agreement.
All right, so we've got a complete other agreement. I walk into a for sale by owner.
Correct.
And the for sale by owner says, look, I'm only going to pay you 1%, John. I appreciate you bringing me the buyer, but I'm only paying 1%. That's all I can afford because I'm really tight. I owe a lot of my mortgage. And based on the sales price that, I've got it listed, I have to sell this. I don't have any money to do it otherwise. I'm sure we've run into that scenario once or twice in the past. So at that point, it's the realtor's choice of whether or not they want to bring the buyer?
Well, actually, in PA here, underneath that broker's fee, they can actually put in there for what they're going to charge their buyer in the event the property is not listed with a broker. That is, one of the fill-in-the-blanks that the agent should be filling in.
And then in that particular case, the buyer would actually have to bring money to the table over and above their normal closing costs to pay based on that contract if you were going to enforce that.
Correct.
Okay.
And one of the interesting things in the buyer agency contract, if a buyer backs out at the end for no reason, here in PA, it says right here, the balance of broker's fee is earned if buyer enters into an agreement of sale during the term of this contract, whether brought about by the broker, the broker's licensees, or any other person, including the buyer. If buyer defaults on the terms of an agreement of sale, broker's fee will be paid to the by buyer to broker at that time. So, in the updated buyer's agency, buyer-intended agency, if they walk on you for no good reason, prior to settlement, you can go at the broker has to do it, but the broker can go after them for the fee.
Sounds like a sticky situation.
Well,
have you ever gone after him?
It doesn't happen that often, but I think really, precedent has to be set because realtors, in my opinion, do a lot of work and a lot of times get stiffed at the end for the commission. And that's the case. All of a sudden they just change their mind and don't buy the property for whatever reason. We've actually earned our commission.
Yeah, well, yeah, you're driving around, gas.
Everything.
Yeah.
Everything. And we should get paid at that point in time. We're in business to, support ourselves, support our families, make a profit. And,
it's your time.
Right. It's the same thing as if you were listed on a seller with a listing agreement and they walk at the end, they are the commission.
I can buy that. I can go with that. I mean, you are earning your money. You've done all the work. You've done all the due diligence. You've done the backgrounds. You've done everything you can as far as contracts, informational, digging up everything on the property, going over the seller's disclosures, and God knows there's another 40 steps in between when you're talking about trying to coordinate that and the lender and getting them to the table after all the inspections, etc. So when they get to the table and they say, and I would imagine a lot of times at that point it would be cold feet, that they say,
right,
maybe we'll just continue to rent.
Right.
This is a little little too overwhelming for me.
However,
right
now. In addition to having the deposit now, if you can waive this document in front of them and say, oh, well, that's okay. Not only are you going to possibly lose your escrow deposit to the seller, on top of that, you owe me whatever my percentage was,
You're so mean.
Yeah. Right. But how would they like it if they went to work next week and just didn't get paid? Because
that might actually happen in the next coming weeks with the state, I believe. Right? Aren't we having another one of those issues with the?
Let's hope not. Let's keep that one on the table. So we've gone through a little bit. The buyer's fee agreement.
Right.
The different types of agencies. Again, if someone has a question, feel free, call in 717-249-1787. We're going to be having John Stas on in a little bit, so I'll just give a precursor to that. John's going to be talking about mulch and downspouts and issues like that are on the outside of the house, drainage too, which here in the summer with these heavy storms in some areas has become a big problem. So John will be coming on in about 10 minutes, just giving you a heads up. But, let's go to the obligations of that seller's agent. Well, did you go ahead?
Well, yeah, I want to go back to the obligation of a seller because, for sale by owner, it always seems to be a sexy option for people because they don't want to have to pay that listing agent's fee, right?
Right now in the market, absolutely, because they know that there's tight inventory.
Right. So I bring a buyer again, and all right, well, you know what? Let's go to the scenario where there's no realtor involved as of this point. So I advertise my house on for sale by owner and all kinds of other places that I think is going to work for me and get my house sold.
Craigslist, Backpage.
Right, all those.
Hooterville Press. Yeah, everywhere.
Hooterville Press?
Yeah, Hooterville Press.
I haven't seen that.
Comes out once a week.
So I come up and I knock on the door and I see your for sale by owner sign out front. Can I take a look? Sure. Come on in. So you look through the house. Everything looks awesome, clean. They just had a professional cleaner come through. It smells nice. They got plug-ins in every room. And, we want to buy the house. What do we do next? Well, now you're in the middle of a transaction where neither party really have any clue what to do because the other couple's a first-time home buyer.
Right. And so sometimes they will go to the dreaded word, an attorney, to draw up the paperwork.
I actually ran into that scenario recently.
Yeah, nothing against attorneys, but if they don't practice real estate, they shouldn't do that, in my opinion, because a lot of times they're not up to date on what municipal inspections may be required, other things that may be required, and could become a quagmire later for the buyer and the seller.
True. So let's just say, for example, I go online to Google and I say, Google, print me out a sales contract. And out pops a generic sales contract, and I bring it to the buyer, and I say, here, sign here. You're going to pay me $300,000. Awesome. Okay. Awesome. All right. You need to get a loan, and you're going to get a conventional loan. I'm sure these contracts have some of that stuff in there. And you want to, you don't need an inspection, do you? You waive your inspection. Well, I need to get an inspection. My dad always told me to get an inspection. All right, well, we'll get an inspection. So you put an inspection in there. At what point throughout this transaction, when it closes, all based off of Google Docs, just generic documents, and they purchase the home, the bank does an appraisal.
And then they get to knock at the door, and it's the local borough saying, Whoa, we just noticed that you transferred ownership of that. We have an ordinance here that before you do that, we have to do an inspection. So you let them in the house, they do the inspection, and they find 5 or 6 items that need to be corrected. Electrical, structural items, couple things. Who should pay for that?
That's the question. Because no seller's, I'm going to assume in this particular point, no seller's disclosure was ever presented.
Probably not.
There's no record of a seller's disclosure, right?
Right. And they probably got no home warranty.
This home was built in, let's say, 1957, 1960. So how do we know there isn't asbestos or lead or anything to that effect in the property? How do we know? Was there any lead disclosure?
Well, let's assume in this case, no.
Well, they didn't do a property disclosure. So now all of a sudden,
buyer didn't know they could do a home inspection.
well, yeah, exactly. So and there was no seller's disclosure. And let's just say there was something extremely evident that was covered up after inspection that was never disclosed.
Right.
Now what? I would imagine after you go through courts and law and everything else that it's the seller's responsibility to make sure that they're presenting all this.
Yeah. Yes.
Which is why we have real estate agents that specialize in making sure all these disclosures are, and realtors and brokers go through painstaking agony to make sure that every document on a transaction is uploaded and saved to a file for every transaction
for 3 years
for these particular reasons.
And this could be the chink in Zillow's armor. You know, with Zillow, with that instant offer that they want to do between their pool of 5 big investors and sellers with the instant offers is they don't know every state's or any local municipality's quirks.
Every state or municipality is going to have their own. I mean, that would be like a logistic nightmare.
Right, but so I think that's
and the liability, I would imagine, would be pretty great, assuming, especially if we're talking about investors, we're talking about properties that probably have some issues. If people are willing to take
need some work.
Instant offers and less than what maybe the market price is. So I would imagine they're opening themselves up to a lot of legal lawsuits and or legal issues in general.
Yeah, so I think that could be, a flaw in their plan, because I don't know if you can avoid things by just saying as is, property purchased as is. But I don't know that would necessarily waive the necessity to have, for example, a Harrisburg City inspection of the property, or over in Middletown they have to inspect the sidewalks, or Pembroke that has a borough inspection also on the property.
Right. So yeah, the as is, I know, as long as it's disclosed, I believe is how that works, isn't it? Like if you disclose, there's a water issue, you're buying it as is. If it's an evident issue, in other words, if you walk into a house and there's a massive crack in the foundation of the wall, and it's so evident when you walk in that even a bat could see it.
Right.
That I think the as is kind of leaves them off the hook. But if the water hasn't been on and that every pipe in the place is dripping water, and that, I still think there's ramifications if you can come back on that.
Right. That's something that should be disclosed.
So in any event, regardless of whether you're for sale by owner or using an attorney, it sounds like you should at least have a transactional licensee at least facilitate the paperwork to make sure both ends are covered.
And hopefully, at least give them the correct paperwork and explain to them, at least what their rights and their options are, because a lot of them are just options.
Right. And there are options. I mean, you can go for the full service. You can go for the transactional.
You can go for some, you're right, like flat fees or for sale
assist
by
to
owner
sell,
companies. Yeah.
To try and save a few dollars, and you're still getting a combination of a little service, actually a lot of service, without anything. So yeah, there's a lot of options. Either way,
there are definitely some options.
You should cover yourself.
But guess what? I wonder where.
Who's at the door?
Must be Home Inspector John Stas from EnviroQuest. How are you doing this morning, John?
Hey, good morning, guys. Doing great.
Well, all right, so we don't hear any seagulls in the background
No
today.
Seagulls, no waterfalls. You're in a private jet on the way to Tahiti.
Yeah, where are you, Kingsley? Where's your ticket? The New Brokers Realty office. We got to go check it out, right?
We're already here. We're in Tahiti, and we're waiting on you.
It's a remote broadcast
yes,
today.
It is. So what do we got going on today, John?
Just wanted to talk a little bit about mulch and grading. First of all, a story. I had a business when I was in high school, like a little landscaping business during the summer. And I was putting mulch out for people. I had a great place to get my mulch from a farmer. And a couple weeks after I installed the first couple batches of it, seeds started popping up and some sort of plant started growing. So my mulch that I bought was contaminated with seeds. So one of the first things I would say is make sure that you know where your mulch is coming from, buy it from a reputable dealer so that doesn't happen to you.
Now, we're not talking special seeds here, are we, John?
No magic seeds, just some sort of annoying seeds where I had to go back and dig it all up and replace it. So
and
first thing is,
I think you probably got the backyard brush or whatever that was just kind of ground up and thrown into a pile.
Yeah, maybe it was pretty consistent though. I think it was contaminated with some sort of seed that because every batch of it that I got, it had these plants growing up through it that came from the mulch. So
interesting. You always get what you pay for, I guess.
During home inspections, a lot of times we see the mulch is like improperly installed. You want to make sure that you don't ruin your grade, that you want to make sure you don't pile it up over the siding and have a mound of mulch that's covering up the siding. You want to have clearance there. If it goes up over the siding or the exterior cladding, it can provide a pathway for insects and moisture to get into the home. So that's one of the things during a home inspection. We look for proper clearance between the mulch or the ground level and the exterior cladding, like 3 or 4 inches ideally.
Does mulch itself affect water drainage?
Well, yeah, you want, when you install the mulch, you want to make sure you have, the grading to slope away from the home for the first 6 to 10 feet away from the foundation. It should slope away. So, yeah, you can pile up your mulch and create a situation that's channeling water towards your home. A lot of times it's a little more, the ground itself reflects the same angle as the mulch, but you can actually pile that mulch in such a way to create a negative slope towards your house and channel water somewhere that it shouldn't get.
So even if the land underneath it or the ground layer underneath it is sloped properly, if you don't put the mulch in, you're saying the water will still channel back to the house? Could?
Yeah, I mean, you can create a negative grade with mulch. A lot of times it's a more substantial problem than that. You're not going to correct a major grading problem by, sloping your mulch away. But you can create a problem because you want to, that water is going to follow the surface. And if you have your mulch piled up and it's sloping the water, channeling the water towards your foundation, it can create a problem.
And mulch is one of those things that you pretty much have to put out every year, right? I mean, otherwise it starts to look degraded and bleached and kind of nasty. I mean, it really is just a beautification of the house, right? So this is something you do every year, and you can easily kind of accidentally not put it in right if you're not being cognizant of what you're doing.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, it's probably a personal preference. Yeah, it does degrade, and probably it starts looking kind of ratty after a year or so. So a lot of people do install it every year, and it gets piled up there. You can create a situation, as I described earlier, where it's piled up over the cladding, creating a situation where if you have aluminum siding, it'll start to degrade that siding. Or if you have vinyl with wood framing behind it, or any type of structure there, it will start to can create a situation where moisture can get in places where it shouldn't. So you need to be careful with that.
So, John, when your guys are there doing the inspections, do they take a look at like any of the hardscaping, like when somebody's put up like retaining walls. Is that something also that's done with your inspections outside?
Sure, yeah, a lot of things we look for. We look for, with the hardscaping, a lot of times they have sand between the pavers, so we look for signs of settlement. And sometimes people will create basement stairwells where we look for proper handrails. We inspect those basement stairwells for the structurally the walls and proper railings. It's a lot of times you can create a situation where it's a slip or a fall hazard, missing the proper railing. We look at retainer walls to look for that they're properly installed, that they're not bulging or leaning or falling over. With the pavers, it's important to get the proper product. A lot of those retainer wall systems are built to not exceed a certain height. So you need to research, if you're going to do it yourself on one of those, that the system that you're buying is rated or approved for the proper height, and then that it's installed properly with the backfill so it has adequate drainage.
John, another thing that we're starting to see in a lot of homes are the new, what I call suburban burn barrels, the fire pits,
Yeah.
Is that something also your inspector would look at? If it's like a masonry one or something like that?
Yeah, typically they're excluded from the inspection. It's like a periphery item, but, we're going to look at, if we see something where it's too close to something flammable, we may make a note of that, or if it looks like a fire hazard.
I've shown a couple houses lately that, have had pools, and then they have like an outdoor kitchen. Is that something extra in the inspection or something that would be normal in your inspection?
Yeah, normally, we inspect if they have a patio or hardscaping. We're going to take a look at that. Retainer walls, we do look at those.
So if we're going back to, I just want to talk about back to the house again, because we're talking about mulch and grading. The big thing I think nowadays is stamped concrete. So, people that are pouring and or putting a glaze or layer over an existing patio, just to kind of beautify what's already there. When you see a patio like that that's been recently laid out, or even a previous patio, do you actually check grade level of patios as opposed to just looking to see that there's signs of water coming back to the house?
Sure. That's the thing that we find sometimes. So when we're inspecting a patio, one of the first things you look for is where the patio meets the house. You look for caulking there. What will happen is if the patio, let's say it was installed level, or if it was installed properly and the water's being channeled back towards the house, the water gets under it at that house wall joint, and then it starts to settle even more, and you'll see where people tried to caulk it and repair it. So that's a major item that we look for. Another thing you can do is we'll put a hose on the pad. If there's a hose hooked up there, we'll turn it on and see which way the water runs to see if it drains off.
It always reminds me of, a freshly painted car, an older one, So why would a car need to be freshly painted when you're, out trying to buy a used car? I would imagine it's kind of along the same lines as, why is this patio all of a sudden either egg caulked or re-poured or whatever the case may be on an older home? I would imagine as a home inspector, these are signs that you see on a regular basis and can kind of point them out fairly quickly.
Exactly. Yeah, it's like, why is that poster 2 inches off the ground on the why'd they hang that painting right on the floor there? So you look behind, you can see things that sort of look out of place as a home inspector, and we look behind those, or fresh prior repairs or something that's freshly painted. Yeah, so we do look at those things. From my own experience, I did have a patio one time that was, it had deteriorated and it was cracked, and it was at a rental property. And so what I did was, so it was sloping the wrong way, cracked, damaged. I got some sand delivered, and I spread the sand out, and I corrected the grade, and I put pavers on top of the sand on top of the patio. And that's been, 7 or 8 years, and it's still almost in perfect condition. So that was probably a cheaper repair than busting up the whole patio and re-pouring it. So
Interesting.
All right. So if I've got some patio work that seems to have some cracks and I need to find out whether or not it's a slope or whether I need to re-pour it or have some of John's special architectural design, what's the best number to give you a call and come out and take a look at that?
Best number is 717-233-6144.
And you're on Facebook at?
On the web at evqharrisburg.com, and we also have a Facebook page, our request.
Awesome. John, as always, thanks for coming on today. Always learn something.
Thanks, guys.
Enjoy the day. I think it's supposed to actually be fairly cool for about an hour more.
Yeah.
And we'll catch you next week.
Thanks, John.
Okay, have a great week, guys. Talk to you then. All right, bye.
Well, a couple things I want to talk. Hey, Al, what are you doing there, buddy? Come on, panic. Big dog's panicking today. All right, so listen, folks, a couple things I want to go over here before we wrap up the show here. Just a reminder that we are giving away tickets up to 4 per veteran, firefighter, police officer, pastor, president, military. So you can go on our Facebook page and put us in there, and that you'd like a set of tickets, and that's for the September 10th game at the Lancaster Barnstormers, and those are courtesy of Jesse Storm of the BrokersRealty.com company, his Lancaster office, and you can also Google Jesse Storm. Big open house today, buddy. We've got a mega open house today at 345 Scotch Pine Road in Dillsburg. And if you'd like to get information on that, you can text Scotch to 79465. But that mega open house will be open from 11 till 2 today and 11 to 3 tomorrow. That's hosted by Rain Hess. It's really a cool house, Kingsley. You should stop out and see it. An 1816 era stone house on about an acre and a half.
1816 as far as
1816. So can you imagine? That's like what 40 years after the Declaration of Independence was signed, and like 50 years before the Civil War.
I imagine it's got some beautiful, authentic.
It's got an 11-foot fireplace. 11-foot wide fireplace. So, and it's also open all the way to the roof with skylights in one section. Yeah, this home has just been done beautiful. Priced at $325. So again, text Scotch to 79465 and stop out and see Rain today. She'll be there again from 11 to 2 today and 11 till 3 tomorrow. And what do you have on your housekeeping items for the day?
I'll tell you what. Well, we're talking about for sale by owner and agencies. The one thing we didn't talk about, obviously, was making sure a buyer was pre-qualified. So, one thing as a for sale by owner, or even having a transactional licensee help you or assist you, the other thing you want to do is make sure that they're qualified. So make sure they have a legit qualification or approval letter. In which case they can always go, to pagoloan.com. You can have them just give me a call and say, hey, we saw them on the Real Estate Radio guys, and call Kingsley up and get pre-qualified. You can call my line at 717-200-4800 for a pre-qualification. Consultations are always free.
And if you're looking for a home, go to searchhomesinpa.com, and you can search probably about 2/3 of the listings available in the state of Pennsylvania and Maryland, and part of New York. So,
fabulous. I think that covers a nice long area, all the way from New York to the Poconos, all the way down to Maryland.
Yeah, lots. Hey, and our new agent, Dan, the auction man, up in Bloomsburg, he sold his first listing.
Yeah.
10 days up in Danville. Sold.
Wait. Dan?
Dan. Well, Dan. The auction man.
Oh, okay. Dan the auction man.
Yep.
Up in Danville.
Well, he's actually in Bloomsburg.
Oh, all right, but the house was in Danville.
But I think that should be his tagline.
It could be.
Dan the auction man.
Dan in Dan.
Yeah.
The auction man. All right, well, congratulations on the first sale.
So, till next week, we want you to get your real estate on and...
Real questions?
Real answers?
No.
Oh, real questions, real people.
Real answers.
Real answers.
Yeah.
All right, guys.
We'll get that right one of these weeks. Until next week.
You've been listening to the Real Estate Radio Guy with real estate broker John Rainville. Listen each week at this time and learn all about buying and selling, mortgages, market conditions, property maintenance, and much more. It's brought to you by GSF Mortgage Corporation, EnviroQuest Inspections, and SearchHomesInPA.com. It's the Real Estate Radio Guy, Saturday mornings at 8 on Oldies 102.9 and AM 960 WHYL.
It's all requests. Join Joe Ricky and John Christopher Saturdays 9 to noon for the Morning Sunshine on WHYL.
Joe Ricky in the morning. WHYL. Wild. WHYL.
From the L.B. Smith Ford Lincoln Studios, Oldies 102.9 is WHYL Carlisle. It's all requests. Join Joe Ricky and John Christopher Saturdays 9 to noon for the Morning Sunshine on WHYL.
Whatever it is, take it to the top. Keep moving up, don't you ever stop.